So today I am going to explain you about chapter 2, transaction management. So first, what are the things we are going to be discuss is that basic concept transaction, asset property, state diagram, concept of schedule, conflict and view, concurrency control protocol, and recovery techniques. Transaction are set of operations. What does transaction means in Dbms? Transactions are the set of the operations that are used to perform some logical set of work. A transaction is based to make the change data in database, which can be done by inserting new data, updating existing data, or by deleting the data that is no longer required. And here is the example of transferring money from the bank A to B to friend's account. So here are the steps. First thing, it will read bank details and then fetch all the details. Then how it is being done. In the case we need to perform at least two updates. First update is happening to sender account from where the money is sending, and the other update is happening in the receiver account who is receiving the money. Both of the subjects should either get committed or get rolled back. If there is an error, we don't want the transaction to be half of the committed state. Operation of transactions. Following are the main operation of transaction. Read. The read operation is used to read the value of X of database and store it in the buffer in the main memory. Write. Write the operation is used to write the value back to the database in the buffer in the from the buffer. The acid property, it has four components. A stands for atomicity, C stands for consistency, I stands for isolation, D stands for durability. The entire transaction takes place at once. The data must be consistent before and after transaction. Multiple transactions occur independently without interference. The change of successful transaction occurs even if the failure of system occurs. These are the acid properties which we discussed. Hmm. There are two key features involved in the transaction: rollback and commit. If there is a failure in transaction, absorb the execution and roll back the changes made by the transaction. If the transaction executed successfully, omit the changes to the database. Consistent must be consistent the state before and after the execution of the transaction. This ensures that there are no errors in the database at the point of time. Application programmer is responsible for the maintenance of the consistency of the database. Here is an example. Isolation: a transaction shouldn't interfere with the execution of another transaction. To preserve the consistency of database, the execution of transaction should take place in isolation. That means no transaction should run concurrently when there is a transaction already running. For example, an account A is having $400 and it is transferring $100 to B and C both. So we have two transactions here. Here we can say the concurrently, but the transaction rates 400 balance. In the case final balance could be 100 instead of 200. This is wrong. Now is durability: once a transaction completes successfully, the changes it made into a database should be permanent even if there is a failure system. The recovery management component of the database. So so the next thing is, so the state of diagram, how the activity is being performed. Here we can see active, read or write, what the function we want, partially committed, permanent changes, omitted, terminated, and same if the failure condition occurs, it get rollback, absorted and terminated. active state. Active stage. If the transaction is in execution, then it's said to be in active state. During this state, read or write operation can be performed. Partially omitted state. Once the whole transaction is successfully executed, a transaction goes into partially omitted state where we all have have all the read and write operation performed on the memory, local memory instead of actual database. The reason why we have this stage is because transaction can fail during execution. So if we are making the changes in actual database instead of this, the database may be left in consistent stage in the case of any failed state. The transaction considered failed when any one of the checks fails or if the transaction is absorted while it is in active stage. If the transaction is executing, a failure occurs, either a hardware failure or a software failure. Then the transaction goes into failed state from active state, omitted state. If the transaction complete execution successfully, then all the changes made in local memory during partially omitted state are stored in the database. Absorbed state. If the transaction failed during its execution, it goes to the from failed state to absorbed state, and because of it's in the previous state, all the changes were only made in the main memory, and these unomitted changes are either deleted or rollback. The transaction at the point can restart and start afresh from the active stage. Terminate state, the stage of action. A transaction reach terminated state, which certain transactions which are leaving the system can be restarted. Dbms schedule. A series of operation from one transaction to another is known as a schedule. It is used to preserve the order of operation in each of the individual transaction. When the transactions are running concurrently, there needs to be sequence in which the operation are performed because the type of schedules in DBMS. Serial schedule. In serial schedule, a transaction is executed completely before starting the execution of another transaction. Non-serial schedule. It contains many possible order in which the system can execute the individual operation of the transaction. There are more, again subtype strictly schedule. If the right operation of the transaction precedes a conflicting operation, reads or write operation of another transaction, then the omitted or absorted operation of such transaction should be precede the conflicting operation. Castleless schedule. If the transaction is going to perform the read operation on a value, it has to wait until the transaction who is performing write on the value omitted. Non-recovery schedule. If the transaction is reading a value which has been updated and can omitted only, the other is obtaining serial. And serializing in DBMS, when multiple transactions are running concurrently, then there is an possibility that database may be left inconsistent. So thank you.